Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Mr. Merrigan's Moments in Geography. I am your host, Mr. Merrigan. Today, we are going to be starting a look at the nation known as Mexico or Mexico. And for my students, this is where we're going to get to kind of start diving in again to some of the regions that we're getting to around the world. We started things off with the US and Canada, and now we're going to make our way a little bit further south into Mexico. So, what are we going to be able to do today? We're going to be able to list and describe the locations and the physical features of Mexico, including land masses, bodies of water, and climate. We're also in this video going to get into some of the economics, but we're going to start here with some of these physical features. So when it comes to Mexico's land, and again, we're going to talk about its economy as well. We're really building a bridge between, kind of find ourselves between two continents. Mexico kind of serves as a land bridge, at least certainly the the heart of it, between North and South America. And physically, geographers consider it mostly part of North America, but culturally, it fits in a little bit more with Central and South America, or what we sometimes refer as Latin America. And we're going to kind of dive more into that culture here. And part of its language, part of it is history, part of it is even certainly that the people have closer ties to the people of Mexico have closer connections to Central and South America as opposed to, say, the United States or to Canada. And so it certainly finds itself kind of as a combination of North American but also Latin American as well. Physical features, if we're looking in the west, we certainly find Baja California. If we go to the eastern portion of Mexico, we're going to find ourselves near the Gulf of Mexico as well as the Caribbean Sea. And of course, if you go back west, you'll find the Pacific Ocean. And again, here in the east, you'll find the Yucatan Peninsula, which again, a lot of people who do travel to Mexico will travel to the Yucatan Peninsula. There's also some really cool prehistoric history here. Paleontologists believe that they have found um, the site of where the meteorite struck the world, and perhaps, um, at least if not was the major factor, at least helped knock over some of the dominoes, which led to the extinction of the dinosaurs. For my students, we're going to talk a little bit more about this in class, but for those of you who are kind of just listening along, it might not be a bad idea just to look at this. But when it comes to some of the physical features, you've got the Sierra Madre Mountains, you've got the Plateau of Mexico, the coastal lowlands, the Tierra Caliente, Tierra Templada, Tierra Fria. And so certainly we're going to go over these in class, and part of what I'm going to have you guys do is find out details about this. But for those of you who are just following along, this might be something you want to come back to and check out if you want to dive a little bit more into the topography and the physical geography, but also some of this climate. And a lot of it has to do with elevation. So certainly something you're going to want to look into if it interests you. Shifting gears a little bit here, we're going to highlight the economy of Mexico. And in particular, we're going to look at the different regions. And because depending on where you are in Mexico, you'll see different economic categories. So I'm going to highlight those, including manufacturing. And again, this is a tie-in with NAFTA. Certainly agriculture, mineral wealth, tourism is a big, big aspect of the economy in Mexico. And we're going to talk about the impact of NAFTA. So looking at the economic regions, we're going to start with northern Mexico. So for my U.S. listeners, this would be the part of Mexico that is closest to the U.S. border. This is one where you're going to see recently there's been an economic boom. And a big part of this is these trade agreements in particular. It started in the 1990s with NAFTA, and you're starting to see it continue under the USMCA, which is the newer agreement that began in 2017. And one of the things that you'll see, and it's kind of pictured here in the upper right hand corner, has to do with automobiles. And so, definitely something that has greatly benefited northern Mexico is that companies like General Motors will bring their factories to northern Mexico as part of their operations. They're not going to do all of their operations here, but since remember in our conversations that a certain percentage of vehicles need to be made within either Canada, the United States, or Mexico, and they have to, of course, include certain labor laws. And so, because of NAFTA, because of the USMCA, you've seen an economic boom here recently. And so, places like Monterrey are known for their steel and their cement, of course, also able to export to the United States. Tijuana and Ciudad Juarez, these are both known for what are called maquiladores or excuse me, maquiladoras. These are factories that assemble parts that oftentimes are made in other countries, sometimes in Mexico, or excuse me, outside of Mexico, like the United States and Canada, but you'll also see products coming from around the world. And so those economic trade agreements have really benefited northern Mexico. Central America, or excuse me, Central Mexico. This is where more than half of the people of Mexico live. And it's also where you'll see one of the world's great mega cities, which would be Mexico City, or as it's known in Mexico as Mexico DF, or Mexico District Federal. Um, it's the home to more than 22 million people, and certainly has some really interesting history with it, dating back to the Aztecs. Um, Agriculture and industry certainly have flourished here. It is a gigantic city that was built kind of in a a marshland, and they have certainly built it up. But one of the things we do know, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in the future, is that Mexico City is actually sinking into the ground, and so that's something that certainly the Mexicans will have to think about moving forward. Looking at southern Mexico, of the regions that we're going to kind of highlight here between northern and central Northern, it's by far the poorest um, of the three regions. The soil here does not make it ideal for agriculture. The soil is kind of poor in quality, and so subsistence farmers are people who kind of grow enough to feed themselves and maybe enough to make enough money to buy more seeds for next year. You'll find them in the inland. You will see some wealthy plantations near the coast, but they predominantly grow things like bananas and sugarcane. And so, um, certainly an area where you'll see a big divide in wealth between rich and the poor. Um, but again, is an area that overall has more poverty than the other two parts of Mexico. As far as Mexico's economy today, they are among the top 15 largest economies in the world, and they are growing. That manufacturing has brought in a lot of opportunity. You've also seen a fair amount of immigration, and certainly in the last 4 years, you've seen some changes in immigration policy in the United States. And this video is being recorded at the end of 2020, so December 2020. And so certainly you've had an increase in immigration and people settling in Mexico. Um, Agriculture is vital here, and you can see a lot of the things that are produced in Mexico in the cuisine. And so when we get to talking about Mexico's food, certainly that'll be a big part of it. Corn and beans and rice, wheat and vegetables. Certainly you'll see um, coffee, cotton, tobacco, certainly livestock. Beef is a very highly used product, and as well as your fruits. It's also becoming increasingly industrialized, and it's starting to actually find more petroleum reserves. And actually, it's one of the world's largest producers of petroleum, um, including some that goes to the United States. Tourism, however, is especially fruitful as an industry, particularly along the coastal plains. So places like Cabo San Lucas and Cancun and Riviera Maya. These are places that attract millions of people every year. And so, certainly, this remains a really important part of the economy of Mexico. All right, as always, I really encourage you guys to check in with the quiz here. For my students, certainly, hopefully, you've been following along with the guided notes. Ask me any questions that you have. For those of you who are just kind of coming along for the geographic knowledge, I appreciate it. This is really meant just to be a really brief introduction. And so I highly encourage you to go deeper, especially with the economics. We're going to get into some of the history of Mexico in later editions. But certainly, I want to thank you all for listening. And again, for any of my students, please reach out if you have any questions. That's going to wrap up another edition of Mr. Merrigan's Moments in Geography. Have a wonderful day, everyone.